form of prayer that we're looking at this evening, and that is leading reflective prayer. And I have a picture here of St. Joan of Arc. And as you know, St. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. She had been accused of being a heretic. And, of course, we know that she wasn't, but at the time of her trial, the inquisitor kind of ridiculed her and said, you say that God speaks to you, but that's only your imagination. To which Joan courageously replied, how else would God speak to me if not through my imagination? St. Joan is pointing out a very plain fact that many of us tend to overlook, and that is that God indeed speaks to us through our imaginations. In fact, in his book, Touched by God, Father John Powell explains that God speaks to us through our imaginations not only through words, but he also conjures up feelings, memories, desires, thoughts. So when we talk about God speaking to us, we're not necessarily talking about hearing voices. Sometimes there are words that we hear or that are placed into our imagination, but God also speaks to us in some of those more elusive ways that I just mentioned, feelings, memories, and desires. And in the Catholic tradition, there's a long history of praying in such a way as to invite Jesus to speak to us through our imagination. And that's what we call reflective prayer. And this was a prayer that St. Ignatius of Loyola was a great champion of. In fact, in his book, What is Ignatian Spirituality, author David Fleming tells us that Ignatius himself never considered himself to be a great intellectual, even though he went to some of the finest universities in Europe, but he had a remarkable imagination, and so he played on that strength. His imagination played a big part in his own conversion, and it continued to shape his prayer life in the years that followed. And so he developed an approach to prayer that encourages individuals to use their imaginations and to enter more deeply into gospel stories, but paying attention to what they feel, what they hear, and see, and smell, notice, and even taste. And so it's this reflective prayer that we turn our attention to right now and take a look at some of the strategies that are involved in leading reflective prayer. The nice thing to know is that leading reflective prayer really only involves 3 simple steps. And so let's take a look at that first step. And this step is simply getting ready, getting our participants ready for prayer. And we do several things to help them get ready. The first thing being to encourage a comfortable posture. I always invite the young people that I'm teaching to get out of their desks, out of their chairs, and to sit on the floor or lay down on the floor. They really just are much more comfortable for, let's say, a 10-minute prayer period, getting out of their seats. Now, how long a meditation like this lasts depends on how old your group is. And a good rule of thumb is 1 minute for every year of age. So I'm teaching 4th graders, and they are about 10 years old. So my guided reflections are lasting about 10 minutes this year. The last few years when I was teaching 8th graders, those kids are more like 13 years old. So my reflections were lasting close to 15 minutes. So if you're teaching kindergarten and you've got 5-year-olds, you will be lucky if you can pull off a 5-minute guided reflection. But that's good to know. You can, and I do know lots of people who lead guided reflections for preschool age and kindergarten children. They just have to be much shorter. So after encouraging a comfortable posture, and it does not have to be a formal posture like you see in this picture, it doesn't have to be a yoga position. It's just a position that's comfortable, like these 2 young ladies here. They're just sitting with their hands in their lap, and they bow their heads, and they close their eyes. That's comfortable enough. After we've done that, invite some deep breathing. That's a very helpful way of getting people to slow down and to be a little bit more in touch with God, who's at the center of their lives. And then the third point, which I've inadvertently covered by those pictures, sorry about that. The third point is using some reflective music. Just put on some instrumental music and invite people to calm down by that. Total silence is almost too much at a time like this, especially for young people who are so hyper a lot of times. It's good to just begin with some instrumental prayer. So this first part, getting ready, might take anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes, depending on your age group. Let's move on then and look at the second part of leading a reflective prayer. And this is the main part of a guided reflection. What you're going to be doing here is you're going to be using either a published meditation, a published guided reflection, or using one that you prepared yourself. And you're going to find the more that you do these, the easier it's going to get for you to simply prepare these on your own, because they follow this pattern that I've been talking about. But what you're going to do, whether it's a published guided reflection or one that you put together, the important thing is that you're speaking slowly, you're pausing often, and you're inviting participants to enter into a place using their imagination. It could be a Bible story, or it could simply be a place that they're familiar with, a favorite place of their own, their backyard or a forest preserve, or just some beautiful place that they want to go to. If it's a scripture story, it could be the birth of Jesus or the wedding at Cana or Jesus calming the storm on the lake. It could be any scripture story. But you slowly invite them to see and to hear and to smell and feel the surroundings around them. Now, when I talk about using a published meditation or guided reflection, take a look at my blog. When our webinar is over, I have an example up there for you to see from the Finding God program. But the important thing is that at some point, you invite your participants to engage in a conversation with Jesus. And you basically at some point kind of wean yourself from the guided reflection and just allow the young people or your adults that you're leading in a reflection, excuse me, to just talk and listen to Jesus. So finally, the third part of our guided reflection is then simply allowing some quiet time and then bringing this guided reflection to a close. You want to invite them to just have some silent prayer, and to do so, you might even want to turn off that music, and now you can have silence because it's not hitting them all at once. You've transitioned to it. And you also want to slowly transition them back into the present moment. Don't just end a reflective prayer suddenly. Don't just turn the lights back on and say, okay, let's get back in our desks and open up your books. You want to invite them back slowly, make sure they're not hitting their heads on any tables if they're getting up off the floor, and also check to make sure someone may have fallen asleep, because that happens when you lead guided reflections. And then finally, when the prayer is over, respect their privacy. Don't force anyone to talk about what happened in that prayer. You can invite them if they wish to, but respect their privacy and don't force anyone to do so. Excuse me, a couple of resources that I want to share with you. Guided Reflections for Children, Volumes 1 and 2, Praying with Scripture and Praying My Faith, are a couple of resources that you may want to look at from Loyola Press that have guided reflections for children in them, as well as another resource called Pray Me a Story, which invites you to use children's stories for leading children in guided reflections. Another resource that I encourage you to look at is the 3-Minute Retreat from Loyola Press. You can use this for your personal prayer. You can use this with adults that you're praying with, or with children as well. it's a good opportunity to learn a more reflective form of prayer. And then there's also a number of other resources that you can look at in the Loyola Press catalog that have Bible stories in them for children that you can use to turn into guided reflections. But I also want to draw your attention to the program you see on the lower right-hand side called Meeting Christ in Prayer, which is a program to use in the parishes to teach adults how to pray in this imaginative way and using guided reflections for adults. So those are just some of the resources available to you. I think we have time for perhaps one question, Nick. If you have one, go ahead and shoot it to me.
All right, we have one from Diane here, and she asks, is it okay to remind the parents that they are the primary teachers of prayer?
Oh, Diane, thank you. And absolutely, not only is it okay, it's something that we must help our parents to remember to do. Talk with your catechetical leader about what resources can you get to the parents so that they can also be helping their children to pray and that they themselves can be deepening their prayer lives. So that's a very good question. Let's make sure that the parents are assuming that primary role for teaching their children how to pray. And I would like to thank all of you for joining in, and I thank Nick Yanto and Carrie Fryer and all the people here at Loyola Press for making this webinar possible, and once again, especially to all of you for participating.